The vines have taken most of it now. I am standing in the canyon on a Tuesday morning in October of 1913, and I am an old man, and the thing I am looking at is older than I feel. The iron sides have gone the color of a wound that healed badly, deep red-brown, streaked with black where the moisture runs down from the cliff face above. The oak planking rotted out sometime in the last decade, I think. But the frame held. Iron holds. That was the first thing my brother told me about it, 40 years ago, when we were still close enough to smell each other's fear. Iron holds, he said. Wood rots, rope frays. A man's word goes soft given enough time. But iron holds. He was 18 years old. He said it like he was 60. I reach out and touch the side panel. The stenciled letters are still there, under the vine growth. I can feel them through the leaves without pulling anything away. I know what they say. I knew what they said before I ever learned to read them. DNRGW survey, materials car 7. 40 years of weather and the paint is nearly gone, but the letters were pressed into the iron when they made it, and iron holds. I don't pull the vines away from the place above the door either. I don't need to. I know what's there. I stand with my hand flat against the car's side, and I let the canyon do what canyons do, which is nothing, which is everything. The Cucharas runs maybe 30 feet below me, low this time of year, silver and indifferent. A hawk is working a thermal somewhere above the rim. The air smells of pine resin and cold stone, and the particular mineral sharpness that this canyon has always had, that no other place I have ever been in 81 years on this earth has managed to replicate. Some places have a smell that is entirely their own. This canyon is one of them. I have not been back here since the spring of 1875. 38 years. I told myself I was not coming back until I was ready. Then I told myself I would never be ready. Then one morning last month I woke up in my house in Pueblo with the particular clarity that comes to old men sometimes. Not wisdom, just arithmetic. And I understood that the number of mornings remaining to me was a fixed number, and that it was not a large one, and that the canyon had been waiting long enough. I took the train as far as the tracks went. Then I walked. It took me 3 days, which once took us 6, and before that took the survey crew 3 weeks. I am slower now, but I came back. And now I am here, in the place where everything began. The summer of 1873, the worst summer of my life, the summer that saved it. The summer of 1873 began on a Tuesday in June, 9 days after we buried our mother in the municipal cemetery on the east side of Pueblo. I remember it was a Tuesday because the gravedigger charged less on Tuesdays, something about the regular man being off. And we had exactly $4.60 between us, which was the entirety of what remained after the doctor and the boarding house and the pine box. $4.60. I have never forgotten that number. It is the kind of number a boy memorizes the way he memorizes a scar. My brother was 18. I was 14. We had no kin within 500 miles that we knew of, and the ones we might have reached by letter were people our father had left behind, for reasons neither of us fully understood. The boarding house gave us 2 days' grace before the room went to someone else. We spent one of those days sitting in it without speaking much. We spent the second one deciding. He was the one who decided, really. He always was. I followed because following him was the only thing that made sense in a world that had just finished making sense entirely. He spread our father's survey maps on the floor. 3 of them, old ones, creased so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. And he put his finger on a line running southwest from Pueblo into the Culebra Range. A railroad cut, he said, surveyed 4 years ago, never finished. He'd heard about it from a man at the freight office the previous winter, some talk about a grading crew that went in and came back out and never went in again. There might be equipment left, he said. There might be shelter. There might be something. I asked him what we were looking for, exactly. He folded the maps and didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, "Somewhere that isn't here." That was enough for me. We left Pueblo on the morning of June 14th, 1873, a Saturday, before the heat came up. We carried everything we owned, which did not take long to inventory. Our father's Henry rifle, 44 caliber, with 31 cartridges in a cloth loop, a hand axe with a cracked handle. He'd wrapped himself in strips of wet rawhide that had dried tight, 2 wool blankets rolled and strapped, a tin cookpot with a bent bail, a canvas sack with maybe 4 days of cornmeal and salt pork if we were careful, and my school composition book, half filled with the things I used to write when I still had a desk to write at. That book is the reason I can tell you any of this with any precision at all. A 14-year-old boy and his need to put things into words, that is the only archive this story has. We walked southwest, into the hills, following a line on a map that was already 4 years out of date. The first day was easy, the way beginnings always are, the body not yet depleted, the spirit still carrying the momentum of a decision. We covered perhaps 11 miles before we made camp in a dry creek bed south of the Greenhorn Road, ate cornmeal mixed with a little of the salt pork, and slept without speaking. I wrote 2 sentences in my composition book by firelight. Left Pueblo, going southwest. I was 14 years old and not yet a good enough writer to know that the most important things resist being summarized. The second day was harder. The trail climbed into the pinon and the scrub oak, and the packs, which had seemed manageable in the flat light of early morning, began to find new ways to press against bone. My brother carried the rifle and both blankets, without asking whether I minded the distribution. I minded, but not in any way I could name fairly. The axe rode on my pack frame and knocked against my left shoulder blade every 8th step. I counted the knocks for a while. I stopped counting somewhere around 4,000. We had water from a spring on the afternoon of the second day, good water, cold enough to make the teeth ache. We sat on flat rocks above the trickle, and did not speak for nearly half an hour. A gray hawk worked the ridge above us in long, tilting circles, patient in a way we were not yet capable of being. My brother watched it the whole time. He had that quality, the ability to watch a thing without needing it to mean anything. I have spent my whole life trying to learn it, and never quite managed. By the 4th day, the pinon had given way to ponderosa, and the air tasted different at the higher elevation, sharper, thinner, with a resinous quality that clung to the back of the throat. We were following the old survey grading by then, or what remained of it, a shelf cut into the hillside, never more than 12 feet wide, in places eroded almost to nothing, and in other places still clean and deliberate as an intention. Whoever had graded this road had known his work. He had followed the contour with care, keeping a consistent grade, respecting the mountain's argument. You could see it in the placement of every cut. This had been a man who believed something was coming, who believed the iron would follow. It had not followed. What remained was a ledge through the wilderness, purposeful and abandoned, like a sentence someone had started and walked away from mid-clause. We walked the ledge because it was easier than the slope, and because the map said it led somewhere, and because when you are 14 years old and have nothing left to lose, a line through the mountains that someone else believed in is reason enough to keep moving. The canyon opened below us on the afternoon of the 4th day, and I heard my brother stop walking before I saw why. I stepped up beside him and looked down. The canyon was perhaps 300 feet deep at that point, and wide enough that the far wall caught the afternoon light while we stood in shadow. The cucharas ran along the bottom. I could hear it before I saw it, a low, continuous sound, like something breathing, and the walls were red and tan sandstone layered in long horizontal bands, each one the record of some year so old it had no name. Spruce and fir came down to the rim on both sides, and continued part way down the walls where a ledge or a crack gave them purchase, and below that, the stone was bare and vertical and indifferent to everything that had ever tried to live on it. He did not say anything. He just stood there, looking down into it, and I stood beside him, and for a moment, neither of us moved. What I remember most from that first sight is not the depth or the color of the stone, or even the sound of the water. It is the feeling of scale. You could feel how old the canyon was. You could feel it the way you feel cold, not as a thought, but as a fact that enters the body. The mountains had always been there. The river had always been cutting. And whatever we were, two boys from Pueblo with cracked boots and 4 days of cornmeal between them, we were very small against all of that. And it was not a bad feeling. It was, in some ways, the first honest feeling I had felt since our mother died, 3 weeks before. The ledge dropped here, following the grade down toward the canyon rim, in a series of careful switchbacks. The survey crew had blasted through one section where a granite rib jutted from the slope, and the blast marks were still visible in the stone. Clean half-cylinder scars from the drill bits, packed in pairs. Someone had sat in that exact spot with a hand drill and a hammer, in 1869 or thereabouts, and made this passage possible, and then had walked away and never come back. And 4 years later, two orphaned boys from the Colorado Territory were walking through the gap he had cut and didn't even know his name. We started down. The grade was steeper now and loose in places. The freeze and thaw of 4 winters had worked at the cut edges, and small slides of gravel had fanned across the ledge. We went carefully, one at a time on the worst sections, the one ahead watching while the other crossed. This was habit by then. This was how we moved. The canyon deepened around us as we descended. The light changed. Less sky, more stone. The sound of the river grew until it filled the air completely, surrounding us from all directions the way sound does when it reflects off walls, and the smell of the water came up cool and mineral from below. We had been walking for 6 days. We were almost out of food. The canyon bottom was nothing like the rim. Up on the cut, you could still see sky in every direction, pale and wide, the kind of sky that makes a man feel small but not trapped. Down here, the walls rose on both sides to maybe 300 feet, limestone and dark basalt banded together in colors you don't have names for, streaked with iron rust, and the pale gray-green of lichen that has been growing on stone since before any white man set foot in these mountains. The river ran close to the east wall, narrow and fast and very clear, maybe 30 feet across at the widest bend we could see. A dipper bird worked the shallows, bobbing its head in that mechanical way they have, as if it had somewhere to be. My brother stopped at the water's edge and set down his pack without saying anything. He knelt and drank from his cupped hands, then filled the tin pot and set it on a flat rock to boil for the cornmeal. We had perhaps 2 days of meal left, maybe less. I had been rationing it since day 4, and had not told him how close we were to empty. He was 14. Some things were not his to carry. I sat on a river stone and pulled off my left boot. The heel had worn through the inner lining, and the skin beneath had gone from blister to something rawer, the kind of hurt that arrives quietly and stays a long time. I wrapped a strip of wool around it, boot back on, laces tight. The river sound was tremendous, constant. It filled the space between us in a way that made conversation unnecessary, which suited us both. After we had eaten, half portions, enough to keep moving, we walked south along the riverbank, staying close to the west wall, where the ground was more level. The canyon bent here in a slow curve, and around that curve the west wall began to change. The clean water-cut limestone gave way to something older and more broken, sections where the rock had fractured and receded, forming shallow caves and overhangs. The railroad graders had worked along this wall. We could see the blast scars continuing, lower now, closer to the water, and in one place, a short section of rough-cut timber cribbing still stood against the cliff face, holding back a section of loose fill. And then my brother stopped walking. He had gotten perhaps 20 yards ahead of me, which was his habit. He was always the faster one on flat ground. He stopped and stood very still, the way he did when he was looking at something he wasn't sure yet was real. I came up beside him, tucked into a natural recess in the cliff wall, maybe 40 feet back from the river's edge, sitting on a short run of iron rail that ended at both ends in open air, was the shape of something large and iron, and entirely still. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. The shape was right there in front of me, no more than 40 feet away, and still my mind refused to assemble it correctly. The recess in the cliff face was deep enough and shadowed enough that the object inside it read first as simply darkness, and then as rock, and then finally, when the afternoon light shifted just enough off the river surface to throw a pale reflection up into the alcove, as iron, long iron, squared corners, the unmistakable geometry of something made by human hands and left somewhere it was never meant to stay. My brother had not moved. He was standing with one hand loose at his side and the other resting on the stock of the Henry, not gripping it, just touching it the way you touch a wall in the dark. I came up beside him and we stood together and looked. It was a rail car, an ore gondola, iron-framed, with heavy oak planking along the sides, the wood gone gray and checked from 4 years of canyon weather, but still solid, still holding its shape. It sat on perhaps 40 feet of iron rail, embedded in the cut stone floor of the alcove, and those 40 feet of track ended at both ends in nothing. No connection, no continuation, just 2 short lengths of iron, laid down by men who had intended to come back and never did. The car itself was maybe 24 feet long, 8 feet wide. The sides rose to roughly chest height on my brother, who was tall. On the near side panel, in paint so faded it was more memory than color, we could still read the letters D and RZW Survey, Materials Car 7. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The canyon had gone quiet in the way it sometimes did in the late afternoon, when the wind dropped and the river seemed to lower its voice and everything held still. A pair of swallows cut past the mouth of the alcove and were gone. The light inside was dim but not dark. The recess faced southeast, and though it was past midday now, a faint warm glow still reached the far interior wall of the alcove, reflecting off the pale stone and filling the space with something that was almost comfort. My brother stepped forward first. He walked to the near end of the car and put both hands flat on the iron side panel, and stood there with his head slightly bowed, the way a man tests a door he's not sure will hold his weight. The iron did not move. It had not moved in years. It was settled into that alcove the way a stone settles into a stream bed, not resting on the ground so much as having become part of it. He looked back at me over his shoulder. I had already picked up the pace of my breathing without noticing. There was something about the stillness of the car, the completeness of it, that made the space behind my sternum go tight. He stepped back from the panel and walked the length of the car along the outside, trailing his fingers against the iron. I watched him the way I always watched him when he was deciding something, quietly, without appearing to watch at all. His hand dragged over the rivets, over the stenciled letters of the railroad's name, over a long rust-colored streak that had bled down from a bolt head and dried there years ago. At the far end he stopped and looked at the wheels, 4 of them on this end, iron-flanged, seated on the short run of track as if waiting for a locomotive that was never coming back. He crouched and looked under the frame. I came and stood beside him. The underframe was a lattice of iron cross members, dark with old grease and dust, and the particular blackness of metal that has lived through many winters in a damp place. Something was bolted to the center brace. A box, roughly the size of a saddlebag but made of iron, with a hasp latch. Locked. My brother did not touch it. He stood up and looked back toward the open end of the alcove, toward the light. He said we should check the inside. There was no door in the side panel. The car was open at both ends, a gondola built to carry ore, not men. We walked to the near end, and my brother stepped up onto the coupling iron and swung himself over the end board. The oak planking of the floor groaned once under his weight, and then held. He reached back, and I took his hand, and he pulled me up after him. The inside smelled of iron and old wood and something faintly mineral, the stone of the cliff behind us seeping through. It was perhaps 8 feet wide, and I could stand at full height, and my brother could almost. 24 feet from end board to end board. A long rectangular space of shadow and faint light, the southeast-facing opening admitting what remained of the afternoon. The floor planking was sound along the center, softer near the edges. One plank had split and pulled away from its nail. The end boards were solid iron. My brother walked to the exact middle of the car and stood still. I had never seen him stand like that inside any structure. There was something different in the set of his shoulders. Not tension, but the opposite of it. A careful stillness, as if he was taking the measure of something he did not want to disturb. Outside, the river moved. A crow called twice from somewhere up the canyon wall and went quiet. He looked at me. I knew the look. It was the same one he'd had outside our mother's house in Pueblo on the last morning, standing in the road, pack on his back, not saying anything because there was nothing that needed saying. He turned back to face the open end of the car, where the canyon light came in. I stayed near the door, the open end, I mean, the place where the iron frame dropped away to nothing, and the canyon air came in cool and smelling of pine resin and moving water. He had not moved from the center of the car. His boots were planted wide, the way he stood when he was deciding something, and I knew better than to speak into that silence. The light was changing. Late afternoon in that canyon came fast, the sun dropping behind the western wall, while the sky overhead stayed pale and open, and the effect was a kind of premature dusk that gathered in the shadows under the cliff face before it reached the canyon floor. The southeast opening of the car caught the last of it, a long wedge of amber that lay across the floor planking and reached almost to his boots. I looked at the floor where the light was. The center planks were dark with age. Oak, I thought, dried to the color of old leather. One nail had worked loose from its board and stood up a quarter-inch, catching the light on its flat head. I thought, that will want driving back down before anyone walks over it by night. Then I noticed I had already said anyone and not us in my own mind. I noticed that and did not say anything about it. He finally crouched, not to look at anything specific, just crouched with his forearms on his knees, in the way he had been doing since he was 12, and thinking something through. His hat brim dropped forward. The river outside was constant. It had not changed in the hour we'd been in the canyon, and I understood suddenly that it would not change, that it had sounded this way when the survey crews came through in 1869, had sounded this way the winter the project was abandoned, had sounded this way through every spring thaw and dry August since, indifferent to all of it. The constancy of it was not comforting exactly. It was more like a fact you could lean against. He reached out and pressed 2 fingers flat against the floor plank nearest his boot, testing for give, for rot. He pressed in 3 places, moving outward from center, and each time the wood held. Then he did something I had not expected. He sat down, fully, cross-legged, in the center of the floor, his pack still on his back, and looked toward the open end and the canyon beyond it. I had not seen him sit like that, without purpose, without a fire to tend or a watch to keep, in a very long time. Maybe not since before our father. I could not recall exactly. There are things that disappear so gradually you cannot mark the last time they were there. I sat down too, a few feet back, and we both looked at the light coming in. The light that came through the open end of the car was the particular gold of late afternoon in canyon country. Not warm exactly, more like aged brass, the kind that makes everything it touches look older than it is. It moved slowly across the floor planking as we sat there, the 2 of us, not speaking, and I watched it reach the toe of his boot and stop there, as if uncertain whether to continue. I do not know how long we sat. Long enough that the river sound settled into the back of my hearing, the way breathing does. You stop registering it until it stops. Long enough that a pair of Steller's jays landed on the lip of the alcove above us, looked in, and left without comment. He was the one who moved first. He unslung his pack, not with any urgency, just set it down beside him on the planking, and unrolled the near blanket from the top of it and laid it flat, smoothing it at the corners, the way a person does when they are deciding something without deciding it out loud. I said nothing. I had learned by then that some decisions required silence around them the way a fire requires air, not to fill the space, but to let the thing breathe. He stood and walked the length of the car again, but differently this time, not assessing, more the way you walk a room you are beginning to call yours. He put his hand flat on the iron wall at the far end, where the metal was coldest, in the shadow the cliff threw, even in afternoon. He left it there a moment. Then he walked back to where he had laid the blanket and sat down on it. He looked at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. I set my own pack down. We had not owned a thing since Pueblo. Not a door, not a floor, not four walls arranged with us in mind. We had slept under overhangs and in the hollows of fallen timber, and once, on the third night out, in a shallow cave above the creek that smelled of animal and wet limestone and was not large enough to fully straighten in. We had been moving because moving was the only answer we had to what had happened. And now, here was this iron floor, this southeast-facing mouth, this particular angle of brass light crossing toward us from the canyon. Outside, the river kept its own counsel. I opened my composition book across my knee. I wrote the date at the top of a new page, June 19th, 1873. I did not write anything else yet. Some things need a moment before they become words. That first night, we did not sleep much. The canyon went cold faster than either of us expected. The sun dropped behind the western rim while there was still blue in the upper sky, and the temperature came off the cliffstone in a way that felt deliberate, as though the rock had been saving it all day for this. We had no fire. What we had was the iron itself, which gave nothing, and the two wool blankets, which we pulled across ourselves side by side on the car's oak plank floor, with our packs as pillows and our coats laid over our feet. I lay there listening to the river. It did not sound the way a low river sounds, flat and patient. It sounded occupied, full of its own business, indifferent to the fact of us. Somewhere above, a stone shifted on the cliff face, or maybe an animal. My brother was very still beside me. I could not tell if he was asleep. I did not ask. At some point, I became aware of light. Not the hard light of full morning, something earlier than that. A gray, preliminary kind of light that found the open end of the car and reached in carefully, feeling its way across the floor, planking toward us. I watched it move. I had nothing else to do. It moved the way careful things move, slowly, without announcement. Then it became gold. The sun had cleared the canyon's east wall, and whatever came through the open end of the car was no longer gray. It struck the iron ribs along the car's interior ceiling and came back changed, warmer, amber, the color of river water over flat sandstone. It reached my brother's face before it reached mine, and I saw him blink. And then, after a moment, he turned his head and looked at the light the way you look at something you are deciding whether to trust. He sat up. He pulled his coat on over his shoulders. He stood and walked to the open end of the car and stood there looking out at the canyon in the morning. I did not move yet. I watched him from where I lay. The light was all around him. The river sounded different in the morning, lower, more willing to be heard. He turned back and looked at me. The expression on his face was one I had not seen in a long time, since before our mother, since before a great deal of things. He said nothing. He didn't have to. I sat up and reached for my journal. Not to write, just to hold it. Some mornings you need something in your hands before the day begins. We stayed like that for a while. the two of us in the open end of the car, not speaking. The canyon was still cold in the way that high country is cold even in summer, a cold that lives in the stone and won't be argued out of it before 10 in the morning. My breath came out white. His did too. We watched the mist lift off the river in slow scrolls, and I remember thinking that I had never seen anything so patient as mist. It had nowhere to be. Neither did we. He built the fire. He always built the fire. He had a method. Small tinder first, then a careful architecture of sticks. Never more than he needed. Never wasteful the way young men tend to be when they are cold and want the feeling of plenty. The smoke climbed the cliff face and dissolved. The tin pot went on. We had cornmeal left, not much, and he measured it the way you measure something that has to last. By judgment, not by eye. I opened my journal while the pot heated, not to write, still, just to look at what I had already set down. Dates and distances mostly, the names of creeks, how many cartridges we had used and for what. The kind of record-keeping that is really a way of saying, we are still here, we are still moving. These days are real, and they happened. I ran my thumb along the edge of the pages and thought about what I would write when I finally did write. He handed me my cup without a word. The cornmeal was thin and had salt in it, and was the best thing I could have been given at that moment. I held the cup in both hands and let it warm my palms, and looked out at the canyon going gold in the morning light. The alcove held us. That is the only way I know to say it. The cliff curved at just the right angle. The iron of the car radiated back whatever warmth the fire gave, and the opening faced out at a view that changed every half hour as the sun climbed. It did not feel like shelter. It felt like something chosen, like the canyon had made a place and waited, and we had arrived when we were supposed to. I thought about our father then, not with grief exactly. Grief had been used up by then, or at least worn smooth. I thought about what he had built with his hands in his life, and what he had not been given time to finish. I thought about what we might yet finish that he had started without knowing it. The fire popped. My brother was already looking at the canyon wall, the one we had not yet climbed. He climbed it that morning. I watched him go, hand over hand up a crack in the sandstone, his boots finding holds I would not have trusted, until he was 40 feet above the alcove floor and looking out over the canyon rim. He stayed up there a long time. I tended the fire and refilled the pot and did not call up to ask what he saw. I had learned by then that he would tell me when he was ready, and that what he saw up high was sometimes just the act of seeing, the distance itself being the thing he needed. He came down at mid-morning, sat on the iron lip of the car and ate without speaking. Then he said there was a meadow up there, south-facing, maybe 2 acres of flat ground before the ridge climbed again. He said the grass was good and the soil looked dark. I wrote it down in my journal. The date, the meadow, the direction of the slope. That is what I remember when I think about the two of us at the beginning of it. Not the hardship, though the hardship was real, and not the fear, though the fear was constant, but that quiet hour with the fire, and the cup, and the canyon going gold, and my brother already looking at the next thing. That was who he was. That was always who he was. I am an old man now. I have come back to this place in the autumn of 1913, 40 years and some months after that first morning, and I have sat here, beside the iron side of this car, until the light has gone the same gold it went then. The vines have taken most of the oak planking. The hearthstones have shifted where the frost has worked them apart, and the seasons have worked them back. But the iron is iron, and above the door he cut with his own hands, the names are still there. The chisel marks are shallow, and the letters are not elegant, but they are legible, and I traced them with my fingertip when I arrived, and I did not speak for a long time. I have been sitting here trying to decide what I want to say about all of it, and I think what I want to say is this. 2 boys with nothing, no mother, no father, no house, no money, no plan, found a place the mountain had been keeping, and they made it theirs, and that was enough. It turned out that was everything. The canyon is going dark. The first stars are coming out over the east rim. I am not ready to leave yet, and I find I do not have to be.